The lights never really go off inside Bedford Hills. They only dim, just enough to paint the long concrete corridor in a sickly yellow glow that never lets you forget where you are. It was past midnight when the scream tore through the silence. High, sharp, and full of panic. It came from cellblock, the part of the prison they called the pit. By the time the guards reached the cell, blood was smeared across the floor. A woman lay unconscious against the bars, and two others were dragged out screaming, their faces wild and terrified. No one talked. No one had to. Everyone in Bedford knew what had happened. Another lesson had been taught. And in America's worst women's prison, lessons were never gentle. How did it come to this? A place where women fought to stay alive each night, where the walls themselves seemed to swallow hope whole. To understand, we have to go back. Back before the scream, before the blood, before the pit earned its name. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, just an hour north of New York City, looks from the outside like any other state prison. Gray stone walls rise above the trees, barbed wire coils on the fences, guard towers pierce the skyline. But inside, it is a different world. It's the oldest and most notorious women's prison in New York State. A place where murderers, gang leaders, and women serving life without parole are stacked together in cells that were built a century ago. The rules are simple. Don't talk too much, don't look too long, and trust no one. On a gray Tuesday morning, a new bus rolled up to the intake gate. Among the women inside was 26-year-old Sarah Mitchell, sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, working night shifts and raising her younger sister. She had never imagined prison. But a desperate night, a bad decision, and a gun she never meant to fire had changed everything. Now she was here, and nothing in her life had prepared her for this place. The intake process stripped her of everything. Her clothes, her jewelry, even her name. Mitchell, Sarah, inmate number 8231, the officer read, as he handed her a stack of prison-issue clothes. The hallway smelled of bleach and sweat. Metal doors slammed in the distance. A guard with a tired face handed her a folded mattress and pointed down a corridor. C-block, cell 27, welcome to Bedford. Sarah stepped inside and stopped. The cell was barely big enough for 2 bunks and a metal toilet. On the top bunk sat a woman with short, silver-dyed hair and tattooed arms. She stared at Sarah without blinking. "You're new," she said flatly. "I'm Tanya. Don't touch my stuff. Don't talk when I'm sleeping. And if anyone asks you to hold something, you didn't hear it from me." Then she turned over and closed her eyes. That was the welcome. The first night was the hardest. The clang of doors, the distant shouts, the hollow footsteps of guards. They all felt louder in the dark. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe past the knot in her chest. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. A harsh, joyless sound. Another voice cried out. Then silence again. In Bedford, silence was never peace. It was a warning. Morning brought no comfort. Inmates shuffled into the chow hall under harsh fluorescent lights. The food was gray and tasteless. The guards barked orders like drill sergeants. And everywhere Sarah turned, eyes followed her, sizing her up, judging if she was weak, wondering if she'd be easy to break. "First week's when they test you," Tanya muttered as they walked back to the cell. "Show fear, and they'll never stop." By the third day, Sarah learned about the pit. It was C-block's nickname for the lower tier cells, a row of rust-streaked doors where the most dangerous women were kept. The pit was where fights broke out, where debts were collected, where silence was currency. Rumors spread fast. A woman scalded with boiling water over a stolen commissary card. Another beaten nearly blind for snitching. Guards pretended not to see. They called it letting the inmates work it out. But in Bedford, working it out could mean anything from a warning shove to a trip to the infirmary. One afternoon, as Sarah mopped the corridor floor, she heard a hissed argument behind her. 2 women, Marla, a tall woman with gang tattoos on her neck, and Denise, a slight woman with trembling hands, were nose to nose. "You owe me," Marla growled. Denise shook her head. "I told you, I don't have it yet." Marla's smile was thin and sharp. "Then you'd better find it. You've got until lights out." The next morning, Denise was gone from the chow line. "Infirmary," Tanya said quietly. "Marla collects her debts." Sarah tried to keep her head down, but prison has a way of dragging you into its games whether you want to play or not. One evening, as she returned from laundry duty, a folded piece of paper was shoved into her hand. Inside was a message. "Hold this in your mattress. Do not open. Do not talk." Her pulse jumped. Contraband. She knew what it meant. If she said no, she'd make enemies. If she said yes and got caught, she'd lose years of her life. She shoved the note back into the woman's hand. "I can't," she whispered. The woman stared hard, then shrugged and walked away. But Sarah's name had been noticed, and in Bedford, that was dangerous. The days turned into weeks, and survival became a routine. Wake up, count, chow, work detail, count again, lights out. Every minute was controlled, every movement watched. Yet under the surface, a hidden world thrived. A black market for cigarettes, pills, and phones. A code of silence stronger than steel, and alliances that shifted like sand. Tanya taught Sarah the small things that could keep her alive. Always walk. With purpose, never reveal too much, and never owe anyone anything. But not everything was cruelty. There were small kindnesses too. An older inmate named Gloria shared her instant coffee one morning. "First week's the worst," she said, stirring the cup with a broken spoon. "Second week you stop thinking about home every 5 minutes. Third week, you stop crying in the shower." Sarah smiled weakly. It was the first real smile she'd had since arriving. Still, the violence was never far. One night, the alarm blared and the block went into lockdown. 2 women had gotten into a fight in the yard. One was carried out on a stretcher, the other was dragged away in cuffs. No one knew what started it, no one asked. The next morning, the guards were jumpier, the searches more frequent, the tension thicker. Tanya shook her head. "This place eats people," she said, "piece by piece." Sarah learned about Bedford's dark history, whispered from bunk to bunk. Decades earlier, riots had broken out over abuse and neglect. Guards had locked women in segregation cells for weeks without showers or sunlight. One woman had given birth alone in solitary. Another had died waiting for medical help that never came. Lawsuits had been filed, policies rewritten, promises made. But inside the walls, not much had changed. The names were new, but the pain was the same. By her 3rd month, Sarah had changed too. The scared young woman who clutched her mattress the first night was gone. She walked taller, spoke less, watched more. She knew which guards would look the other way, which inmates to avoid, which corners not to stand in too long. She was surviving. But survival in Bedford Hills was a fragile thing. One small mistake could shatter it. It happened on a damp Thursday morning. The chow line was moving slow, and the air was thick with tension. Marla, the gang-tattooed woman Sarah had seen, threatened Denise weeks before, was at the head of the line, arguing with a guard about her tray. Words turned into shouts. The guard reached for his radio, and then, without warning, Marla swung. The tray cracked against his jaw. He stumbled back, shouting. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Guards rushed in, batons raised. Someone pulled Sarah down behind a table as bodies collided and boots thundered across the floor. When it was over, Marla was pinned face down on the floor, wrists cuffed, blood on her lip. The chow hall looked like a battlefield, trays scattered, coffee spilled like mud, and in the far corner 2 women were being dragged toward the pit. Not for the first time, and not the last. That night, the prison was on lockdown. Doors slammed shut, lights stayed on, no one spoke above a whisper. Tanya sat on her bunk, staring at nothing. "They'll make an example out of her," she said quietly. "But they'll make an example out of someone else too. That's how it works." Sarah lay awake, the scream from the pit echoing in her ears. She had thought she understood Bedford Hills. She had thought survival was about following the rules, keeping your head down. But now she knew the truth. In America's worst women's prison, survival wasn't just about what you did. It was about what you were willing to become. And as the cell block lights flickered and the guards' boots echoed down the hall, Sarah realized the next test was coming, one that would push her further than she had ever gone before. Because tomorrow, she would be the one they were watching.